everybody, welcome back to this second part of a two-part video covering the painting of the hull on Trumpeter's 1/200 scale Bismarck. Last time I painted the hull red on the underside and the basic grey for the top side of the hull. This time I'm going to go ahead and finish the painting by representing the remnants of the Baltic camouflage. Those were the black and white chevrons on the side of the ship, which were painted over prior to the Battle of the Denmark Strait, but they were just visible under the fresh paint, so I'm going to try and replicate that. I've also got to paint the bow wave, which was present at that time as well, and there is quite a good photograph of the ship showing the bow wave present but not the stern wave, so it had been painted out at that time. One thing that I'm not convinced about is whether or not the shadow which foreshortened the length of the ship, it was a dark grey section at the bow and the stern, I'm not sure that that was present still. So I'm just going to have to think a bit whether or not I do try and represent that, but the bow wave was there on both sides of the ship. So the grey that I did yesterday in part 5A has completely dried now, so it's safe to mask that up. So that's the first thing I'm going to be doing, measuring up and masking off for the Baltic stripes. Then we'll get those painted, then we'll sort the bow waves out. Okay, so I'll make a start with this camouflage, and I'm just using some 10mm Tamiya masking tape to do this. I've already done the port side by measuring up against the scale plans just to get the correct width and positioning of the stripes on the side of the hull, and I've replicated those measurements on the starboard side here so that we get them matching port and starboard. The other little thing that I've done to help get these stripes at the correct angle and at a consistent angle is just to make this little paper template. So I can rest this bottom edge along the bottom of the boot topping, and that gives me the angle to set the tape at. So it's just a simple device really, just to help us get this positioned. And once we've got that angle set, I can just burnish this down a little bit, careful to go over the armour belt neatly and tightly. Okay, that's the first one. I'm doing the full width right the way across the black and white stripe at this stage. Obviously there'll be a division between the lighter and darker colour. So they should end up more or less parallel. And just check that by measuring top and bottom, and they are the same distance, so that's fine. So that's the first one on the aft side of the ship. I'll do the pair forward now. You certainly get through a lot of masking tape doing these 200 scale hulls. The midships camouflage was a chevron. Obviously I haven't done anything about the boot topping at this stage, and my plan is to paint the boot topping around the Baltic stripes. The Baltic stripes drop down onto the boot topping, so it's a bit of a complicated setup. Okay, that's the basic layout of the stripes. I'll obviously mask off a little bit more than that when I come to paint. Just a word about the paint that I'm using. So I think I forgot to mention that the topside grey that I've been using is Tamiya's XF66 light grey, straight from the bottle. And what I'm going to be doing first of all is taking some of this XF66 and just putting 1 or 2 drops of white in it. I just want to lighten it just so that it gives that slightly different effect of fresh paint over the previous camouflage colours. So it has to be very, very subtle. I don't want a much lighter grey, just a very slight difference in tone, really, not much more than that. Okay, so the masks are all on. I've got the paint mixed up. So I'm going to start with the lighter of the 2 greys that I'm going to be applying here. Okay, so I've got the XF66 lightened with a couple of spots of white in the airbrush. The light colour goes forward on the aft 2 stripes, and it goes aft on the forward stripe, if that's not too confusing. As I'm going across this patch, I can see the tonal difference between the 2 greys, and it's very, very slight, but once I take the masking tape off, the contrast will strengthen up a little bit. Okay, I'm happy with that. I've just had a sneak look behind this mask and it's the right sort of variation, so I'm happy with that. So I'll just flip the model over and do the other side off camera, then we'll come back, get the second lot of masking up for the slightly darker grey, get that applied. We can get this masking off then. Okay, so I've got the darker of the greys masked off now. So I'll mix some, again, the XF66 just with a touch of black in it, just to darken it up a little bit, and hopefully that'll give us the effect that we want. This masking this off is really quite tricky. You've got to really concentrate on what you're doing. It's almost as confusing as the original intention of the camouflage itself, which was obviously to disorientate you. Okay, so I used the XF66 darkened with some Tamiya acrylic NATO black. Okay, so I think that's okay. Well, there's only one way to find out. Take the masking off. I think that's a bit too contrasty. I've got the dark shade a bit too dark there. I think I'm going to lighten that up. I can do that now whilst I've only got a couple of them off. Okay, so I'm just going to lighten up the darker colour a little bit. As I said, it's just too much of a contrast at the minute. It's very difficult to judge with greys. Okay, so let's see if that's improved things a bit. That's better, I'm happy with that. Just finally now, I've gone back to some of the original XF66, so the base hull colour, really well thinned down, and I'm just going to mist a coat of that over the whole of the hull, or at least where I've got the Baltic stripes, and that'll just tone them down a little bit, blend them in. I want them to appear sort of ghostly really through the main grey colour. So very light touch with this. Okay, so I'm happy with those. I'm not sure that you'll be able to see those on camera. The effect is very subtle, but I'll probably get some photographs to illustrate that a little bit better if you can't see it on camera. So I'm happy with that. You can tell that there was something under there, but it's not obvious at all, and that's how it comes across. It's very difficult to pick out the overpainted stripes on photographs. Okay, so time to tackle the bow wave now, and I have decided to put the false bow on in the darker grey. I think the photographs that I've got are pretty inconclusive about why the false bow would be removed, overpainted, and leave the bow wave in place. There are all sorts of patchy different shades of grey present on the photographs, so it could be quite likely that the false bow was retained. So I'm going to take a chance and put that in. It'll also give me a good reference for the positioning of the bow wave itself. Okay, so I've mixed some of the 66 again with some 85 rubber black, just to give us a darker shade. I've thought again about that paper mask. I didn't think it was going to work. The thing that I was concerned about was putting masking tape so close to the photo etch that I fitted last week. So I'm just very gently tacking that down. I'm using quite an irregular pattern here because of the photographs that I'm looking at. There's all sorts of patchiness. I don't know whether that's because of the film that's been used and the age of the pictures. It might be something to do with that. But I'm just going to do this in a fairly patchy pattern. So I'll just carefully remove that. Don't want to be pulling any of this brass off. And I'll obviously carry that around the bow and onto the other side. Okay, I want to do the patterns for the bow waves now. Okay, so I've got my off-white, which is just XF2, I think it is, Tamiya acrylic white with a touch of rubber black in it. Okay, so I think that's all okay. Get the tape off and see how we did with that. Again, I want to be very careful around these rigoles. I'm liking that, that's alright. So I'm going to do the other side in the same way, although the pattern is slightly different. I'll show you that when I've finished it. I'll get a couple of pictures for you. But I'm pretty happy with that, I think. Right, I'm going to mask up for the boot topping now. And one of the peculiarities on this camouflage is that these Baltic stripes extended down onto the boot topping, so we're going to have to make a little bit of a shape around the bottom of the stripes to get this accurate. So this is I've got the marking for the bottom of the boot topping, and I'll lay some 6mm tape on top of that. Then I just want to mask off the shape of the stripes. And to do that, rather than try and cut an accurate single piece of tape, I'm going to use 2 or 3 different sections, all with angles cut on them. So I'll just lay that on top of the 6mm tape with the angle right into the corner of the stripe. It's pretty difficult to see because these overpainted Baltic stripes are so faint that it's a bit tricky to locate them properly. And my next piece goes again into the corner. So I've got a nice sharp point there down at the bottom corner. And then we can remove the 6mm tape. I'll be overlaying this with 10mm tape, so that'll allow 4mm of the Baltic stripe to drop down onto the boot topping. So I'll do that same process with the other 2 stripes further back on the hull, and then we'll put the line of the boot topping in. I'm now going to tackle the false bow wave, and again this drop down, and the front section here of the bow was a much narrower boot topping. So that's going to be 6mm straight away, so I'll put some tape on to get that masked off. So using these bits of tape as spacers, I suppose they are, just gives a much more even finish. You could try and do both edges of the boot topping by eye, but it's very difficult over such a length of hull. So using these bits of tape as spacers just helps you get everything lined up. The tricky thing is being able to see the bottom of the boot topping under the grey paint. With the 6mm tape on, I can now put the top end of the boot top in here. So just following the top there, and then remove the 6mm. Okay, so with everything masked off, I want to apply the boot topping now, and that's going to be done in Tamiya XF85, which is rubber black, so not a pure black for this. Okay, so this is the nerve-wracking bit when we take the masking off. I'm fully expecting to have to do one or two touch-ups here and there. It's a big surface to cover. Okay, so that's not too bad at all. I've got one or two touch-ups just here and there to do. It's a bit ragged around this stripe here, but generally that's not too bad for such a big painting project. There's very little to clean up there, so I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, that's good. I'm pleased with that. Okay, so that's the hull finished, and it's a big step in a 1/200 scale kit to get the model to this stage. It's up on the temporary baseboard, so I'm not going to be touching the hull at all anymore. The paint's gone on reasonably well. As I said, there's one or two tiny touch-ups to do, but on the scale of things, when you've got such a big area to cover, it's difficult to get away without any touch-ups at all. So in the next part, part 6, I'll be preparing the plastic decks ready for the Pontos wooden decks, or at least the main deck. And I've got one or two techniques that I use to help get the decks down, so I'll cover that in the next video. But next week I want to get back to the Mosquito. One or two of you have asked whether or not that build has stalled. It hasn't. I'm wanting to get back to it and do the stencils. You remember that I think it was in part 17 was the last of the Mosquito build. I got stalled on it because of the problem with the stencils, but I've got a new set and I'll want to go back to the model next week and get the stencils on, and hopefully the top varnish coat ready for the final details on the Mosquito. So back to that as well, for those of you that are following the aircraft builds maybe a bit more than the ship builds on the channel. So hopefully a couple of videos next week. In terms of the Bismarck, I'll see you next Friday. I'll premiere the deck work part 6 at 8 o'clock next Friday night, so I hope to see you then. In the meantime, look after yourselves everybody, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.